Eugene Mulero with Transport Topics, and joining us today is Jeff Davis. He's Senior Fellow at the Eno Center for Transportation and editor of Eno Transportation Weekly. Jeff, thanks for coming back to the show.
Thanks for having me by again.
The Transportation Committee in the House is meeting on Wednesday, and they're going to talk about infrastructure, and they're bringing in Fred Smith, chairman of FedEx Corp, and the head of BMW North America, and the head of the AFL-CIO to talk infrastructure. Can you tell us what are you going to be looking for during that hearing?
This is mostly going to be a sort of table setting / cheerleading hearing, trying to get the first big news event of the year, talking about the gigantic need for reinvestment in infrastructure by all levels of government. Smith will talk about air and trucking, and BMW will probably talk about intermodal freight and imports from ports. You've got Cargill talking about big agribusiness company talking about intermodal, usually rail, and then you got an equipment manufacturer in the AFL-CIO, and they'll all be on the same page talking about how we as a country need to spend hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild decaying infrastructure. And they'll sort of gloss over does we mean federal, state, local, and how do we pay for it, and what will President Trump's plan look like, because nobody knows what President Trump, the final plan will look like. But this is just a chance to get the agenda out there to reinforce the need again and start the conversation that will continue for the next 6 or 8 months.
We didn't hear any details out of the Republican retreat in Philadelphia last week on infrastructure. Do you suspect that this hearing is going to be a way for Republican leadership to set a mile marker down?
At the Republican retreat in Philadelphia last week, the basic consensus that came out was that they're going to try to do tax reform first. And to the extent that you want to do a plan like Trump's advisors had back last September, October, that relied on federal tax credits to leverage hundreds of billions of dollars of private capital into infrastructure. That has to come from the tax committees, not the transportation committees, and tax reform would be a big part of that. And to the extent that you want to pay for federal infrastructure investment with real dollars, real federal spending, you got to find a way to pay for that. And you may recall that the last chairman of House Ways and Means, Dave Camp, had a draft tax bill in 2014 for comprehensive tax reform, did a lot of the repatriation of overseas income. That bill would have put $127 billion of the repatriation money into the Highway Trust Fund. So the thought of tax reform as a pay-for infrastructure in general, but specifically for making sure that the Highway Trust Fund stays solvent after 2021 when it's going to run out of money again, has always been on people's minds. So apparently the decision in Philadelphia was try to focus on tax reform first and then see what we can get out of that for infrastructure while you're putting the rest of the plan together.
Also, the Republicans indicated that they have a Supreme Court nomination that they got to debate in the Senate. They have the repeal, replace Obamacare. So they have these priorities ahead of tax reform. What's your expectation, having been a student of Congress for many years, that tax reform is going to be part of the first 100 or first 200 days of this year?
The House can maybe get started. Again, tax legislation has to start in the House.
Correct.
I've noticed that people are already starting to de-emphasize the first 100 days, which I always thought was a silly metric anyway. That's April 30th.
Correct.
Because the Senate is so jammed up. The Senate's not going to be able to accomplish much at all of substance except for the omnibus appropriations and all the confirmations you talked about until that time. But they're talking about 200 days now, and that puts you late July, early August, I think. And that's really when a first-year administration tries to get all of its big-ticket items done. Reagan's tax cuts were passed July, signing of the law. The Clinton economic plan, late July. Bush's tax cuts, that time period. That's before Congress goes on that month-long recess in August, has to get yelled at by their constituents for a month. That's when a first year starts to lose its mojo, really, traditionally. So people are talking about the first 200 days and trying to do tax reform during that period. And then infrastructure would pick up after that.
You also brought up, the spring calendar. They have appropriations expires at the end of April. So
the FY17 continuing resolution expires on day 98 of the Trump administration. So
that's right.
Right around the 100 days. And they've got to find some way to get from April 29th through September 30th And I worry that we might have a government shutdown of some duration then, because it's the natural temptation to take a must-pass bill and add a lot of things to it. And I worry that Republicans might keep adding conditions, and none of the funds in this act may be used to enforce this regulation or that regulation, and keep adding stuff onto it until 41 Democrats in the Senate think it would be politically better for them to filibuster the thing and shut the government down rather than let it through. So there's a very strong chance, given the current polarized environment, that we might have a government shutdown for a little while starting April 29th.
Oh, wow. We haven't seen anything concrete out of the Trump White House so far on infrastructure.
No.
However, Senate Democrats took the opportunity to unveil a $1 trillion infrastructure plan of their own. What were your thoughts?
Calling it a plan is a bit, it was an 11-page outline for how to spend $1 trillion, no suggestion of paying for it. But it was interesting to see how because 2 years ago, Bernie Sanders, who was at that point the head Democrat on the Senate Budget Committee, introduced his own $1 trillion infrastructure plan. It's interesting to see how the perspective changed from then to now, because back then Congress was still debating what would become the FAST Act. So $600 billion of Bernie's trillion was going to be deposited in the Highway Trust Fund, and he was going to leave it to Barbara Boxer and Inhofe and the rest of the committees on how to divide that between highways, transit, whatever. But now we got the FAST Act, so the new bill only spends $100 billion, 10% of the trillion, on highways per se. And then there's a lot of other vague stuff. They're going to spend another $100 billion on cities, on and not sure whether that's local roads or housing or whatever, and heavier on mass transit, although not as much high-speed rail as Bernie would have spent. And the piece de resistance in the new Senate bill is it says $200 billion for vital infrastructure, whatever that is, big projects, but they don't say who would select those. Would it be the Trump administration? But I think they're leaving it vague to make people think that maybe we can bring back earmarks in Congress, and maybe Congress could earmark that $200 billion or have some role in that. So that's kind of that was the big news for me out of the Democratic bill, was that they're really wanting a big discretionary program that maybe Congress could help earmark, and that would be their goal out of this.
And Jeff, another moving part of what's happening is Elaine Chao is likely to be confirmed by the Senate this week.
It's I don't know what time this airs on Tuesday, but her vote will be done by 12:45 p.m. today, Tuesday. So that's locked in stone.
So they confirm her. She goes to DOT. What do you expect out of her initial policy directives? Are we talking reviewing regulations? Are we talking about the P3 initiatives? What are you going to be looking for?
She's got to start with basic management, and also to work as quickly as possible to name deputy secretary, undersecretary, assistant secretary.
Do you have any insight at some names floating around?
Not really, and we're still not quite sure to what extent the senior people who are confirmable jobs will be her choices versus whoever the Trump White House Personnel Office suggested, who gets final say on a lot of those.
Correct.
They've already sent a few what they call Schedule C political appointees to DOT, but there's a limit to what they can do without any Senate confirmed person above them. And they've been keeping a very low profile. So hopefully, once she's sworn in this afternoon after the confirmation vote, we'll start getting some news at DOT about how she's going to organize things, who she's going to suggest for some of these senior jobs, etc. They just yesterday, Trump named a Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, who is a career management person there, and God knows that agency needs, hands-on management. So that's pretty quick for a president to name a deputy secretary anywhere. So hopefully, the Trump White House will start naming some senior DOT people in the coming weeks to assist Secretary Chao in trying to formulate this policy. And as far as infrastructure goes, I'm told that because this is not just transportation infrastructure, Trump has talked a lot about the electrical grid, the waterways that are in ports that are run by the Corps of Engineers, and other items, that it's going to be an interagency task force: transportation, commerce, the Corps, the White House, a lot of an EPA, which does the clean water and drinking water grants. A lot of these agencies together are going to operate with the White House to develop the infrastructure plan, not just DOT.
One last point, I want to get your take on this. Senator Majority Leader McConnell, in a press conference in December, he said, when asked about infrastructure, he said he wants to pivot from Obama-era infrastructure spending. And then in her confirmation hearing before Commerce Committee, Elaine Chao was non-committal on the Tiger grants, the infrastructure grants. Fast forward to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, nearly every mayor that I talked to, and during their press conference, they said, we love Tiger grants, we want to keep them, these infrastructure grants. Do you think that Obama-era policy directives, a la Tiger grants, I know that's something that Congress has to authorize, but I just want to get your perspective on those types of issues.
It's interesting to remember that Tiger grants weren't really the Obama administration's idea. They came from the Senate. Senator Murray, who at that time chaired the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee, put them in there and kept them going. And after a while, DOT realized that it was the appropriations committees that support Tiger, not the authorizing committees, not anybody else. So the first $100 million or so of Tiger every year, the project list looks a whole lot like it would have looked if the appropriations committees had earmarked it. And as long as DOT keeps doing that, then the appropriations committee is going to keep providing money for Tiger. If they change the project selection to make it less appropriations friendly, it may wither and die. But Tiger has always been much more a appropriations committee priority than it has been an administration priority. And also remember that the reason we have the FAST Act is because McConnell decided in summer 2015 he wanted to get this whole highway trust fund business done, off the table for the elections and thereafter. So
yeah, and work with Boxer.
He worked very closely with Boxer.
Yeah.
Those two cut the deals, and it's good till the end of 2020. And there's no sentiment on Capitol Hill for reopening all those deals that were struck in formula funding, et cetera, allocation of resources by the FAST Act. So any new Trump infrastructure will go on top of the FAST Act and maybe keep the trust fund going after the FAST Act expires. But there's no appetite whatsoever for reopening the deals that were cut in the FAST Act.
Terrific. Let's leave it there. Jeff, thank you for joining us. And check out the Eno Center's website for Jeff's work.
enotrans.org.
You got it. And Capital Agenda comes out on Tuesdays at ttnews.com. Thank you.